Good morning and welcome to enVista's summer webinar series, Unifying Physical and Digital Commerce. Today we'll be discussing BI for Retail, the journey from data to wisdom. Participating in today's webinar will be Jim Barnes, CEO of enVista, Deanna Kaufman, Managing Consultant at FedEx, and Ryan Kauzlick, Senior Director of Strategic Offerings at enVista. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if we could go ahead and kick some things off here at the beginning, we'll start with some introductions. Jim, do you want to go ahead and start and then go into Deanna and Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jim Barnes, CEO of enVista, founded the company back in 2002 with my co-founder, John Stitz. Excited to actually be the moderator of this panel. Very, very important in today's environment of unified commerce and what's happening in terms of general commerce as relates to BI and what BI is and what BI is not. So I'm really excited. So thanks for allowing me to moderate the panel.
All right, good morning. I'm Deanna Kaufman. I'm a managing consultant with FedEx Corporate Services, and I have a very unique privilege is the team that I support, our consulting team supports FedEx's top e-commerce and retailers. So we have a lot of experience with our retail practice, and we spend a lot of time with data analytics and deriving insight from that data so that we then turn that into actionable items for our customer supply chain. So real pleased to be here and want to thank enVista for including me today.
Yes, my name is Ryan Kauzlick. Again, as mentioned earlier, the Senior Director of Strategic Offerings. Again, just a little bit about my background is I'm a technologist at heart, and the entire business intelligence space really kind of plays into that, and trying to understand what data is telling me, how do I present that data, and giving the actual insights as Deanna had mentioned earlier. So thank you again for having me part of this as well.
Well, good. Like I said, guys, I'm really, really excited about this. So we got introductions behind us, cover the agenda. We'll do a slight presentation. We will make this much of as a dialogue as possible, setting up some context and some content, using the panelists who are subject matter experts around BI and analytics as well. And then if there's questions that the audience has, feel free to post them, and we'll make sure we actually address those. And then, closing remarks and then future presentations of the actual webinar series. So, like I said, really excited about this. So let's just talk about what is BI? I mean, is BI, it seems like BI is this esoteric type term that says, hey, BI. But I took the privilege, you gotta love Wikipedia, you gotta love the dictionary. If you look at simple terms, BI is accumulation of analysis, reporting, budgeting, and presentation of your business data. So it sounds like BI is this overall encompassing architecture or a mindset to basically mine data and then turn that data into things that are actionable. And if you look at it from an enterprise perspective, be able to take business insights, transform that data, turning those signals into things that are actionable insights to produce tangible business outcomes. So I'll pause there. I mean, obviously, both Deanna, you and Ryan probably get this question all the time. Does FedEx have BI? What kind of BI tools do you use? What kind of insights are you using today? And in terms of your day-to-day job, you guys want to basically provide some kind of color commentary as it relates to how you see BI, and is this a representation of BI, or do you think it's something different?
Well, yeah, Jim. So from a FedEx perspective, when we think about business intelligence, we're really fortunate when we think about it, right? And so I think at its core, as you've outlined it and laid it out from a definition perspective, it really has to do with data and then turning it into something else that's actionable, right? Whether that's an insight, a signal, or it helps you do pre-planning, or it helps you do some kind of execution in the future. One of the things that we do at FedEx is that on a macro sense, we see on a daily basis and monitor very closely what the volume looks like in the network, where potential hotspots are, so we can use that on a real-time basis to help our customers, advise our customers that there's pinch points, there's weather events, there's something happening within the network, or there's capacity constraints. And while that may not be as important on a day-to-day basis, it starts to become more important during certain high periods, whether it's a stock-up period leading up to retail peak, or it's within peak, we can use that data and those signals to really provide those kinds of insights and then take active steps to help our customers improve their supply chains in as close to real time. We also use that data on a larger macroeconomic basis because we see so many records. We can tell based on what's moving in the network what the health of the economy is. Some of you may not be familiar, but FedEx is actually a bellwether of what the health of the economy is. And that's because FedEx connects 98% of the world's GDP in 1 to 2 days. So we see, for example, manufacturing data, we see how it goes up, how it goes down. Is it a sustained trend, and what does that have to do for the economy? So FedEx and the volume we carry and the nature of what we carry within the network becomes a real critical macroeconomic insight for the country.
That's awesome. I appreciate that, Deanna. Ryan, any comments around, I mean, obviously I know that you get asked a lot. We do a lot of BI work within enVista, but even outside of enVista clients that we may not be doing BI work for, your thoughts around, it's just a really good definition of BI and something, quite frankly, you would actually leverage in terms of definition.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the definition that you have here is really kind of what the traditional sense around BI has been. I need to be able to create some type of a visualization, and really comes down to how can I make, decisions based off of that, right? And again, overall, everybody has the data, and one of the challenges that, we've been kind of seeing is, data is everywhere, right? And, Deanna was saying, they are using all types of data, whether it's, weather data that may be external systems to even internal systems. And that's what we see, constantly. And everybody's still trying to figure out, how do I get those actionable insights with the multiple data sources? And then, the other thing that's starting to really kind of, blur the line to business intelligence is into the artificial intelligence space as well. And there is some confusion out there because, again, it's one of those buzzwords. But again, looking at BI and at its core is, using the data that you have to make business decisions off of. So, but yeah.
Well,
right,
a couple things. I'm sorry, Deanna, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to add just one other thought, kind of thinking about supply chain. And as many people who are here on the phone and on the webinar are probably experienced with, there's been traditionally from a supply chain perspective, we think about how that data or that signal in the past has tended to be delayed. And so kind of building on what Ryan is talking about artificial intelligence or the amount of data, an interesting thing is really happening, I think, in supply chain as relates to retail and every other category where supply chain is its blood, is that anymore the data is not necessarily real time, and you're not turning it into insights and closer to real time, but you're certainly turning it into insights much sooner. And our retailers who see those signals, see how fast the replenishment cycles are moving, they have more data at their fingertips to better manage their business than ever before, and much quicker than ever before. So what I think is good about that is that retailers out there who are prepared to use the data in an increasingly quickening cycle has less of that traditional supply chain bullwhip effect. So there's really been a change, not just in the amount of data, the potential quality of data, but also the speed with which you can have the data and then turn that into something actionable.
Yeah, and that really aligns back to your traditional just-in-time, right? From an inventory perspective, for within the supply chain or even retail, because of all the different areas that organizations can collect the data and make those real-time decisions in order to replenish, hey, I need to put in an additional order to get it here because I'm starting to see an uptick in, either it's website, hits because there's a certain promotion that may be going out, or you're seeing increased traffic, whether it's within the brick and mortar store. So absolutely.
So I'm gonna propose two questions, one for each of you. Just hold on to the thought, don't answer as we go on, because I want to move on to the next slide. The first question that I've got for you, Deanna, is, obviously you're in a really interesting position with Federal Express. You see a lot what's happening at both a macro level economic perspective in terms of GDP. You also have insights in terms of what FedEx is doing in terms of time compression. My question to you is, who do you think is doing it well? and why. So, but hold on to that question. And again, obviously what's publicly being stated. And then second, in terms of the question to you, Ryan, I want you to answer around the difference between when you say data, right? Where are we storing data? Is that data lake, data warehouse? Is there a difference between data lake and data warehouse? Don't answer it now, but I just want you guys to think about those questions as we move forward. I think those are really important. Who's doing it well, and the distinction between data warehouse and data lakes. So let's move on here. So let's set some context here. Set some context in terms of what is business intelligence, right? Here's what's interesting. What I find is to kind of put this in some context. What we have determined is we're probably less than 15%. Maybe it's slightly higher. This is about a year old. But benefit of the doubt, less than 15%, right, of people are really using enterprise data to use for analytics. And what I mean by analytics, really looking at the data and then doing something with it in terms of what levers do I pull or not pull, or how do I change direction to basically improve the situation I'm in today, right? But, if you look at data, I kind of like this to talk about data as, what has happened. Insight means what it means. Predictive is, here's what you could do about it. But really, I think the utopia is to be more prescriptive by saying, here's what you should do. And thoughts around kind of how I've defined in terms of data insights, predictive and or prescriptive. And again, I asked you guys the question about data warehouse, data lakes, and also to you, Deanna, who you think is doing it well. In the spectrum, right, of data insights, predictive or prescriptive, can you share maybe publicly who you think is doing this well from an overall omni-channel retail perspective, please?
Yeah, so when I look at this definition or essentially this hierarchy, I really think that that's spot on. And what we do when we think about this, and we actually, as you pointed out, we do this at a macro level. We understand, the macroeconomic trends certainly, but a lot more of our practical day-to-day work. And like I said, I work with FedEx's top retail and e-commerce companies, so you can roughly imagine what the top 120 or so look like. And when we work with them, actually, we turn their shipping data and other inputs, like you pointed out, whether that's a weather system or even how our network is operating, where our operating facilities are, automated facilities, late facilities, everything else. We take all of that in a way that helps them become predictive to solve a business problem, right? So I'm sure, everybody in retail, I experience this a lot when I'm out consulting and working with C-level retail contacts. And a lot of people, are very concerned about balancing fast and free, having shorter time frames to turn around product, and to really have that surprise and delight factor. So we use a lot of that data. We ask the customers for both historical data, we look at their forecasts, we look at how the network performs, and we help them from a predictive standpoint to figure out what it is that they could do with their network to either do mode shifting, create different distribution strategies, or those kinds of activities. And then sometimes it turns into something that's prescriptive. If something becomes mission critical for their business success, particularly during peak, right? If, for example, there's a bottleneck in one part of the Southeast, this is prescriptive. You need to be able to do some amount of line haul, move that product outside of this immediate area in order to meet your time promise to serve your customers. So when I think about retailers who really do this well, and I'm going to share publicly public information is in my opinion, some retailers that do this extraordinarily well. I would certainly call out Chewy.com, and many of you on the webinar are probably familiar with Chewy, and they're very well known for their customer service and for how they bring that promise of making sure that your furry family member or feathered family member is taken care of. And what they do with that information on a fairly real-time basis, and they're always looking at it from an analytics perspective. They're taking that data and they're crunching it all the time to figure out what is the best way to serve our customers, how can we get this to them quicker, and how do we always make sure that we meet and exceed their expectations. So they do a very good job, and they have a very strong analytical core that focuses on that from that whole hierarchy of turning data into insights, predictive and prescriptive actions. From an omni-channel retailer, I think many of you have probably experienced Kohl's, and I think some of the things that Kohl's is very good with in terms of business intelligence And frankly, it goes back to good omni-channel practices, right? It's the very first part of the cookbook when I do consulting is always to say, you need to make your enterprise inventory available. You have to be able to open that up so you can see where everything is. One thing that Kohl's is very good and has done a phenomenal job improving operating margin is their ability to predict where in the network do they need to have that product, where do they need to fulfill from, and where do they need to pull something from in order to make sure that they are realizing the greatest profit margin off of a given item before it has to go on clearance or further erode operating margin. And then the last company I would call out that maybe several people are familiar with is probably DSW Shoe Warehouse. Is that they're one of those companies who's really made a journey. And from a retail perspective, the shoe category is always a challenging one because it's one of those categories where stubbornly there's going to be high returns. People need to really try on the product, and to some extent it can even be worse than apparel in some regards. But what DSW has done is over time, and they've talked about this in their results, they've been very good over time about having a clear plan that says that they're going to transform their technology and that they're going to be making data-driven and insight-driven decisions for their business about inventory placement, where they fulfill from, how do they get to a customer, how they stock, and everything else. So, off the top of my head, I think that those are three retailers who do an excellent job and are very committed to turning data into something that's actionable.
Yeah, thanks. And Ryan, I asked you the question between data warehouse, data lake. Is there a difference? And because ultimately, it does start with data. So do you want to kind of share or give your thoughts, the audience, give us your thoughts around the distinction between data warehouse, data lakes, or is there a distinction? And really, what should you have in place at the minimum? If you look at the way I've described this, this is almost like a pyramid. It starts with data. So you want to provide some insights, please?
Yeah, just overall, absolutely. This hierarchy is very similar to what we use on a day-to-day basis with our customers as well. I've said it before, and I'm pretty sure I took it from somebody else that most organizations are data rich, they're information poor, right? So that information is really your insights level, right? So all the data sources, they have everything out there, but they're really not sure what it's telling them. And I go to the 12% of enterprise data is used for analytics. There was actually a study done by McKinsey. Again, this was back in, I believe, 2015, but as it relates to an oil rig, again, it's data. They produce, I think it's close to 1 terabyte of data every single day off of 30,000 different sensors, and they're only analyzing 1% of that, right? Hopefully over the the course of the last 4 years or so that they've increased that, but it just really kind of goes to show of where organizations are at in this pyramid structure, right? From a data to the insights. And, people are slowly moving into the predictive. And it sounds like, Deanna, you guys are definitely moving in the right direction. You guys sounds like ahead of a lot of people. And Jim, you talked about the prescriptive, right? You use the term utopia. I call that the unicorn, right? That's what everybody's striving to find and look for, of how do I actually get a basic understanding of what my data is telling me, and then allow more of the machine learning and the true AI side of it to actually give you more of a prescriptive. Hey, you tell me what I actually need to do. And I think one of the things that organizations really need to take a hard look at is the visualization side of it. That's the easy part. It's really making sure that you understand the data and how it's actually put together, because we've had customers that they believe that their data was telling them the truth, and in reality is it was giving them a false sense of security because of just how the data was put together. And at the foundation of everything really is around your data warehouse or your data lake, right? And from the extract to the point of you're doing your transformations and loading into the different systems, and how all these data sources, are really tying together so that you do have that complete picture, right? So you're starting to see, getting back into the question around the data warehouse versus the data lake is, as enVista, we've actually partnered with some existing companies out there, that are in this space, right? We obviously do a lot of work with Microsoft as well. They have their own Azure data lake. And again, the data lake is allowing you, really to put a bunch of unstructured data or even structured data into a central repository that you can do any types of transformations on it and use it for your reporting. So I don't want to say it's a brand new concept on the data lake side, but it's one that organizations are just starting to take a look at to really see if, hey, is that a cost-effective way for me to store all of this data across all of my systems, with whether they're on-prem systems or now that I even have, software as a service in the cloud, how do I create that hybrid approach that is then giving me what I need, but also what's cost effective? Because if I'm pushing, gigabytes to terabytes to petabytes out into the cloud, it's not necessarily going to be cost effective as well. So again, what's the right way? How are you accessing the data when you need it in order for you to actually generate that insight that you need? And it's becoming more and more prevalent across with the introduction, with IoT and all these other areas as well.
I appreciate that. And look, I like this slide probably because we helped architect this slide, so there's a little bit of a bias around it. But if you think about retail in general, right, and the point of this, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we are moving from single channel that we've done for thousands of years over the last 30 years into a multi-channel where we are looking at, we've had still silos, but multi-channel, basically the invent of the internet, e-commerce coming online in the late 90s, the first e-com wave, the second wave coming on again in the early 2000s, and then moving the last 15 years into omni-channel, where now I really look at omni-channel as really a verb in terms of doing fulfillment from any place, anywhere. And last, we are now starting evolving, which is really more the utopia nirvana, which is what I call unified commerce. And the difference here, and let's set this thing up, if you notice, the customer has always been external, and now the mindset around the customer being really at the center point, right, or being right at the universe, the center of our universe, is really what's all about, what we think it's about in terms of unified commerce. The difference between one customer being external around previous types of philosophies, and now the customer being at the centric. And if you look at this slide, I think it depicts a really good understanding. But more importantly, it also creates a lot of challenges. And the reason why it creates challenges is because of all the data points around that customer. If that happens to be mobile, happens to be the physical store, happens to be digital, and a kiosk or a sales associate or a call center person, or if you're in a B2B world, if it's EDI or managed file transfer, the bottom line is it's data is coming from every place all the time, to your point, Ryan, and not probably terabytes, right? But I mean, probably beyond terabytes, right, of data. So the point of the conversation here is it's evolving. So as we evolve, my point is that your strategy around BI also has to evolve, or quite frankly, be ahead of the fact that you're trying to make this a very, very customer-centric type environment. And I think this slide here kind of sets it up here. It's like, look, if we're going to go get a 360-degree view of the customer, it requires data-driven metrics. And, you alluded to, Deanna, which I think is what Kohl's is doing around inventory visibility. It's data. I mean, we may not think of it as data, but the reality is, if I don't have good inventory visibility and I don't have the data, that I would actually argue maybe it doesn't have to be real time, but definitely near time, right? So we're talking less than 5 minutes. We're talking probably, we don't need to talk about milliseconds, but we're talking about within seconds, right? Probably 30, 40, 50 minutes is too long, but within the first 30 seconds to a minute, in terms of having inventory visibility, you really can't actually enable a unified commerce environment or ecosystem, or even omni-channel if you're not there, without enterprise inventory visibility, both from an inbound perspective in terms of ATP, available promise, or ATS, available to actually ship. So I thought it was interesting that, you had mentioned that Kohl's is doing a very, very good job understanding where inventory is, right? The other component, obviously, is omni-channel fulfillment. How do I optimize my fulfillment? Where should I optimize? Sometimes it's not always about geo-positioning. Sometimes it could, quite frankly, be around gross margin and GMROI, right? What product, what price, what promotions really driving or influencing that customer. And then really, I've got multiple points of engagement. So I'll pause there to see if there's any insights the two of you may have as it relates to this slide, if you feel like adding any color commentary.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go first, Jim, and I'll say that to me, when I look at this slide, I think this is exactly spot on. Is that this is the template or the roadmap, if you will, that retailers want to think about, because they do need to put the customer in the middle. And I've actually experienced that some retailers are simply on a different place in the journey. One of the things I like to point out is, in survey after survey, year after year, it doesn't matter who does the survey, whether it's ComScore or anybody else, some of the numbers about where somebody is in their omni-channel journey kind of remain sort of static. And I think that's because everybody struggles with some of this, particularly the IT part of it and that enterprise inventory visibility. And what you find is that as people make this journey, they start to find out that they didn't start with the customer in mind. And what they have to do then is they have to go back and retool their business in a way that starts making the data and information systems conform to what the customer's experience is. So here's a real life example, and I don't want to name the retailer because I don't want to disclose anything proprietary, but I will tell you this is a real life story where one day I was consulting with the senior executives for supply chain for a retailer. And I asked them, why is it that I can't see on your website whether or not you have this inventory available? And they literally said to me, in store, and they literally said to me, well, we have a different SKU number for the exact same item that's in the store or if you buy it online. So for us to actually go back and give complete inventory visibility, enterprise inventory visibility, we need to redo all the SKUs in our enterprise. Right, so if you think about it, they started off, kind of going back to your prior slides, they were in that multi-channel environment where they were thinking they had a P&L that was separate for their retail operation versus their .com operation. But at the end of the day, retailers have to kind of think about it. Is that the point, is to have separate P&L by channel, or is the point to make this the best experience possible for the customer, and the P&L is something that's enterprise-wide? So I think that a lot of retailers kind of have to walk that actual journey, and some of them have to retool and put a lot of investment of time and energy into rethinking where the customer sits and how that data and then insights feed how they are treating the customer and how they're improving the customer experience. Because let's face it, what's going to drive .com and retail into the future continues to be convenience, selection, complete insight about and visibility about where products are, and making it simple to command and control the process. And you can't really accomplish that without the customer at the center.
Yeah, I mean, well stated. And if we move to this next slide, which I'm going to do here, we've got about 30 minutes or less, and this has been great dialogue, by the way. I really, really appreciate your guys' insights. You said something, Ryan, which I think is spot on around the types of data. So if you look at, what does a 360-degree view of a customer include, I mean, this is a lot of basically points of data. Your profile, your attitudes, your sentiment, your feedback, the ratings of opinions that you may give me in store or actually on my e-commerce platform, content, right? Yeah. Social media, applications, files, public record, the context, when, where, how much, right? What situation, where were you at in that journey? Affinities, behaviors. There's a lot of different things that really shape the customer to understand insights. But where I'm going with the slide is that this is both structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. So it's the complexity isn't the fact that I did a sales receipt, which is structured data, and let's assume I got your email address. But let's assume that once that customer left, they actually sent a Twitter message, or they got into Facebook, or they actually they actually got into, let's call it Snapchat. Again, all that unstructured data coming back into a single repository to actually get insight. So Ryan, any thoughts around some of the things that you've seen around managing both structured, unstructured, semi-structured data and the challenges that can provide? I mean, if we're truly trying to capture all this data to get 360-degree view, I mean, it sounds simple on paper, but as you well know, it's not.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. And, as you listed out here is, I mean, if you just kind of look at the overall, the different types of data sources that you have, right? I'll go straight to a lot of the challenges that these organizations are having is, how do I uniquely identify that customer across every one of those various data sources, right? Because, I might have, Johnny, that's what his real name is, that he's logged in with a loyalty program, but, he may have, a completely different name, out in the social media space. And, it's like, how do you really begin tying all of those together and really understanding, who's who, right? Are you worrying about, somebody being impersonated or something else like that? But, and that's where these organizations, you look at that slide and you're sitting there, thinking to yourself, there's so much there. Where do I even begin, right? And I think this is, and I don't know if that's where you're going with the drip here, is you got to start somewhere, right? And and is start small, right? Get that small win, right? Start with the data that you actually can control at, right? Within your four walls, your systems, making sure that, from a data architecture perspective that, hey, I can begin collecting this. And then you start moving into more of that unstructured data into the social media space and understanding, what Twitter is saying out there versus, from a sentiment and anything else out there. Again, bringing that back into some place, whether it's a data lake or somewhere else that you can actually, understand what it's telling you. And, again, so this is that information that needs to be presented, using all the proper algorithms. And again, it's not something that's easy and that you're going to be able to get on day one, because everything that we're talking about, understanding what type of information I need, how am I pushing the information out to my, the consumer or potential customer or prospect, is it's going to take time. It's going to take constant revisions, every single day, that, as you're looking at, a piece of information, then you're going to sit back and ask yourself, well, what if I had this information? And then you're going out to another data source, wherever that might be, and really trying to figure out, okay, how do I then architect that into my existing infrastructure, or architecture? And again, I think you guys talked about it earlier, is, a lot of these organizations were looking, inwardly from hey, what do I need to do? And we're slowly, moving into that customer centric, it's all about the customer, because not only, as organizations are looking to, I need information to support the customer is looking at it as, well, I need information from you as well, right? And I need that information in real time. And, I want to know what the real-time inventory is. A lot of these organizations are moving to, I'll call it Amazon, right? We all buy stuff from Amazon. We're now getting the pictures of when product shows up on the door. That's more data that people are collecting, so and we're collecting data in a way that we've never thought about using it before either. And how do you use those imagery, right? If a consumer is calling up to Amazon and, that back and forth, and it's been very, very interesting over the last couple of years, really kind of seeing where this is going and some of the new advancements, talking into the whole AI space, and IoT is really beginning to spin up in the retail space in a way that they haven't traditionally looked at it before. So it's been great.
Yeah. Look, and you're kind of a good setup man in terms of Amazon, right? I'm always remorse not to talk about Amazon in any kind of webinar, just given the fact that, and this is factual. I think this is actually pretty public that, if Amazon's going to do its 6-page PowerPoint, let's call it continuous improvement project, right? They're infamous for that what they call their 6-pager, I believe. If they are not capturing data, which I think is really interesting from a mindset perspective, that if the project's not capturing data in some way, shape, or form around the customer and also to gain insights around the customer, it's highly probable that project will not get approved. And so given that, you can kind of see that Amazon really is 100% around data, and then taking that data and putting the analytics around it from a data science perspective, a BI perspective, having business analysts look at this and saying, what does this now actually do, right, for us? And I find that actually fascinating. The whole mindset about their business is really about capturing data. And if you don't capture data, you better justify why you're not capturing the data, which I think is quite interesting. And I think, I think one of the hottest, again, if I were to give any coaching, if you're looking for, and this is unsolicited coaching, if there is a degree out there today, right, and this pains me to say this because I'm a Purdue grad, but Indiana University has done a very, very good job with a degree called informatics, or basically it's called informatics, which is the ability for kids to come out of college with a data scientist background to understand how to mine data, turn that data into something that's visual or not visual, and then present that in a way that actually can drive decision making, which I think is phenomenal. But the point here is, there seems to be today a shortage of this type of talent and skill sets, maybe with the exception of Amazon, because they like to go hire our people, but that's here nor there. But if you think about this, there's so much truth around data being data-rich information poor, Amazon being the exception. And I think it's also the fact that you just don't have the right talents and skill sets, and we'll get to the technology side of this later on in this presentation as well. So I don't know, Dan, I'll let you closing comment, because we got about 20 minutes left, and I'll let you comment on this if you want.
Yeah, so I think that the thing I would comment, and maybe this tease up the technology discussion, Jim, but a lot of customers that I work with who are on the lower part of the retail spectrum, aren't as big as the internet top 100, but gaining maybe in the internet top 500. A lot of them are facing replatforming. And, so one of the things that I try to talk them through as we're thinking through their data strategy is I try to coach them through, okay, if you're replatforming and now the customer is at the center, what data are you capturing about the customer? And it would be shocking, and I guess that this would be, if I could get on my soapbox and offer advice to retailers, and I do this fairly consistently, is to say, build out when you're replatforming or if you're revising your CRM strategy, really think deeply about the pieces of data that you're going to need to create that single view of the customer, right? And so when you go back to the slide about the disparate information sources, whether that's social media that's not so easy to capture, let's face it, the consumer today is willing to share or overshare. Structure your CRM in a way that is going to help you ultimately tie together more and more information and insights from disparate data sources as you're replatforming or rethinking your CRM strategy.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And what I thought I would do, we just got a couple different slides here. We'll go through this quickly, but these are just examples. Forget who the technology provider is. This happens to be Target, which is a BI solution. And I know this particular customer of ours actually hitting Azure on a D365 perspective. But the point here is the C-level executives have got a really, really good snapshot of what's happening in their business. So they've got a pulse, and they're using different ways to actually, they're using different data sources feeding this particular BI tool called Target. Again, I don't care who the actual BI tool is, but what I like about this is it gives me quick insights, radio buttons, it gives me percentages, it gives me totals, it gives me an integer or whole number as it relates to dollar values of really what's happening in my business. So again, here's just a quick sample of a retailer. The next slide is, same retailer, just looking at their business slightly different, right? Looking at my total cost in my stock position, number of stores I had open last year versus this year, looking at my comps compared to this year versus last year by category. So this is, I wouldn't call this near time. This is real-time data that is being updated, but more importantly, one version of the truth being shared across the entire enterprise. So I don't care if you're the COO of the company, the CFO of the company, your head of retail operations, everybody has one version of the truth that they're actually leveraging. Is the business healthy or not healthy? And if it's not healthy, then let me drill into exactly what's happening through this particular BI tool so I can create a report and then start taking actions and insights. So just I thought I'd share that with the actual audience is one basically data visualization. This was interesting. Another data visualization, obviously, Deanna, you shared this. But I thought it was just fascinating, right? I mean, you sit there and go, okay, great, it's a great network. But the same token, it does show the power of the FedEx domestic flight network in terms of how you're actually compressing time. And the reality is, I know with the new announcement, you guys are starting to do things around 2-day ground, actually 2-day air and 2-day ground almost in the same price. So there's something to be said around time compression. I'll pause there. If you have any insights around this particular slide and where you're going with this, Deanna, I'll give you the freedom to do so.
Right. So when we think about how the FedEx network looks and operates, what we do is we look at, and this again is kind of a data exercise that we then turn into insights, either on a predictive basis, again, when we think about capacity constraints in the network, or how the network is operating. I mean, we have what we think of as flash reports that are close to near time or real time that tell us about how the network is operating, volume of the network, pinch points, so we can look at all those different distribution nodes and determine, do we need to make real-time adjustments to our flight operations or to our ground network operations for our tens of thousands of vehicles and start moving that volume around? So we use that data and turn it into insights all the time by understanding cycle time, multiple touches in the network, and then understanding not just information about the box, but what's in the box. And so what we've been able to do over time, when you look at this is the air network, we also have our ground network, we've actually been able to, over time, speed up over 20,000 of our lanes because we know that 95% plus of the time we are actually delivering something a day sooner. And so we can increase our ability to promise, and if we can speed up that time to promise, then that's a better experience for retailers. So we use this type of data both to inform our business, to help our customers grow their networks and their businesses, and to keep making changes to our service levels so that we're better serving everybody.
No, thanks for that. And I think if I continue on to the next slide, this again, different BI tool. You know, this is a solution by a company off the West Coast just another BI tool. But just again, looking at data slightly different. And you know, you talked about this as our prep call, Dan, looking for hotspots, right? So you know, one of the key things that I know that FedEx does, but also we do for our clients, is looking for hotspots that says, you know, give me insights to why this hotspot is there. What's going on? And then more importantly, am I positioning inventory in my network, right, to deal with that actual hotspot? So again, you know, not to spend a whole lot on the slide, but just looking at data slightly different. But I think the key thing is you really have to understand what you are asking for and how you get there. And Ryan, you said something that says, you know, basically start small and then, you know, moving into movement. And I like this. It's not a revolution, but an evolution, right? You don't have to go boil the ocean, but you do have to have a strategy and you do have to have a roadmap, but you can actually go get small wins. You want to provide any kind of insights and your thoughts around that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't, you know, reiterate the point about, you know, starting small, right? And again, everything that you kind of talked about, you know, the technologies, all these great visualizations that we've seen, everything starts with the data, right? You know, if you don't have the data and the architecture set up in a way that is scalable, you know, as an organization expands, as you're looking to get new data sets, and, you know, that's where you've got to start, right? So, and, you know, you look at a lot of the BI projects, you know, throughout organizations, you know, even in the past, a lot of them, you know, how successful have they been, right? There's been this concept of, hey, BI is going to be the silver bullet, you know, I'm going to have this great dashboard. But, you know, a lot of times people are saying, well, one, I don't trust the data that I'm actually looking at. And, you know, two, what am I actually looking at, right? So those are two concepts and things that we really are trying to, you know, look at as we're helping our customers, you know, look at, hey, what's out there? You know, it's the validation of the data. You talked about it before. It's that single source of truth that regardless if it's the CEO level to the manager level to, you know, the individual that's, you know, within a retail store, you know, a sales associate or any other level, that we're all looking at the exact same data. And what you've got to do is you've got to get out of the shadow IT where everybody's, keeping their own spreadsheets or their own access databases or some other mechanism to manage their own data because they've got to manipulate it themselves or they don't trust it. And that's where you set up that foundation, and it's start small, win small, and it's a movement, right? You're evolving your organization, you're evolving your reporting, because you don't want to invest all the money in this boil the ocean solution because it'll never be successful, right? It start small, find that one area or that one operations group that says, hey, I would like a little bit more insight into this. And I try to always focus, hey, let me find somebody that wants to have a little bit more insight, right? Because you're always kind of balancing it between, hey, I don't want you to see what I'm doing versus, hey, I want to actually see what a little bit more insight into it. And once people start seeing, hey, what the data can actually tell me, that story that it's telling you, it continues to evolve, and it's kind of that like a wildfire where it just slowly starts to catch on, and people begin to really truly see that value. And Deanna, I know within FedEx is there's huge value in the data across your entire organization of what is collected, so that you guys are making those informed decisions because you have all the different groups, but everything goes back to the data and having that single source of truth.
Right, and I think building on that, Ryan, for that idea of a single source of truth, and it even builds on the slide, Jim, that you had with the heat map for the states that you're showing from a provider, is a lot of times a customer has almost a heuristic idea about from a retail perspective where they think the greatest amount of demand is, and that frankly impacts how they design their supply chain. It's very common for us to find out that, well, they know that maybe California is a hot distribution point, but come to find out that as they start to look at their data from a demand perspective and what we look at it from an actual delivered perspective, is that maybe it's weighted more toward the LA basin or to the Bay. And so in terms of helping them build the best possible distribution network, you start to look at it on that smaller macro basis and really refine what should the strategy be based on what we know about demand and actual. And I think that's the opportunity to understand the data, test it against many models, and do this in a quick way so that you can make informed decisions and improve your business outcomes.
Yeah, and what I thought I'd do, I added this slide for the audience, and just for a good conversational starter, like to me, this is the BI journey. I know where to start. I think the first thing that I've heard you guys say is, look, you have to have some data warehouse or data lake, right? Connecting the most critical data through dashboards. It could be reporting, it could be analytics or analysis, it could be storyboards. Again, it could be reports, but basically you have to understand the source of the data, but then building up that data model as it relates to having one version of truth. But when you build it, you're building it from a customer-centric point of view, right, first and foremost. And then from there, moving into more of an experience operational excellence, where now you're sharing the data to anyone, and that could be internal or external, and really now using it to make informed decisions around, right? Monitoring the data, making it predictive. So just beyond, I think, going from predictive to prescriptive, right, would be really the number two step in this basically journey. And then 3 is really saying, shaping it for competitive insights. Now that I know my business and I've got a good pulse on it from a data perspective, reporting, analytics, predictive and prescriptive perspective, how can I get insights beyond just my value chain and beyond my value chain to a competitive landscape, right? Is really that third point. So I'll pause there. Any insights the three of you may have, or the 2 of you may have, sorry, as it relates to this BI journey that I've outlined?
I mean, I think that really, those 3 steps is the journey, that organizations, are facing, and where they're trying to go is, again, look in the mirror, understand kind of what your organization has. That's really where we're at on the very first stage. And, then as you continue to expand, right, what are those other areas and, that you can take advantage of. You look at the traditional, the supply chain space is, if I'm shipping product from, a DC to a retailer, well, your data only starts from, the DC to the retailer. With the, introduction of IoT and everybody wanting more and more real-time data out there, well, now you're starting to understand, hey, what's going on with my shipment between, my DC to my retail store, and or even specifically within, like let's say cold storage, right, where I've got product that's, moving around, and that becomes more moving into that competitive advantage, because now you're getting more data about, your fleets and, or how's everything actually operating, and that becomes that competitive advantage as well, because you're starting to understand, from a let's talk about a fleet, even your maintenance schedules, right? Are my vehicles down, because, somebody's riding, the gas pedal a little bit harder, but how do you begin predicting that so that so you can try to plan for those activities that might impact, your overall supply chain, as an example, versus, just the unplanned or unexpected as well. And that's really where you get to that competitive advantage, that maybe your competitor's not using that type of data to make those informed decisions.
Right, and I think that I would build on that by saying that when you talk about step one, and I know that, sometimes people think that, we're oversimplifying when we say that there's 3 steps to something. But on step one, when you think about the blocking and tackling, and I think this is something that Jim and the examples that you've given really, I think, help explain in a visual way what it is that we're getting at. But what I really liked in the step one is a lot of people focus so much on the data and how to turn this into something that's now an actual insight or piece of information, right? Changing it into being information rich. One thing that I have to emphasize is that a lot of my retail leaders that I work with struggle sometimes to use the data to tell a story. So what I really like about what you're saying in the step one, when we're thinking about basic blocking and tackling, is I would encourage people to not just think about data for the sake of data, but really I like the idea here of storyboards, and thinking about dashboards, and how is it that you're actually going to share this and tell a story that helps you get that positive business outcome. And I think that's just the basic blocking and tackling. If you can get that foundationally right, you can build on it into steps 2 and 3.
Yeah, and I'll share with you an example. We had we were fortunate to work with a customer that was looking to build, or to basically retransform their omni-channel environment, right? So they weren't even they realized that they weren't even at a unified commerce type mindset. They still had things that were broken from an omni-channel fulfillment execution perspective: buy anywhere, fulfill anywhere, return it anywhere. And we created for them, I think there were over 32 different storyboards about how we could interact with the customer throughout that entire omni-channel experience. But what was insightful by their CIO is let's capture data along each journey to know if we're doing it right or doing it wrong, so then we can improve upon it. So let's just not take it for face value that we're going to lay out these 32 different scenarios and we're going to get them right. How do we know we're getting them right? And then how do we turn that into insights to actually start nudging a customer into one of these omni-channel environments that, quite frankly, is good for our business? And by nudging them, we're improving our gross margins. So let me put this in basically layman's terms. You said something very interesting around inventory visibility. What we figured out is one of the biggest things that they weren't doing, which was a insight that we gave them, was simply exposing inventory on their e-commerce platform. We know today that there's plenty of statistics that says if I expose inventory on my website, right or wrong that they may not buy, it gives the consumer a positive affirmation that you've got it in stock, and now I'm taking the digital world and driving into a physical world, right? Mm-hmm. So by simply exposing that inventory on the website, we drove an additional 4 to 5% conversion rate, right? But how do I know I'm actually driving that conversion rate? What data am I collecting, and how am I measuring my as-is versus my to-be? And I thought it was very insightful by him to sit there and say, look, let's capture data across these journeys to ensure that what we thought about in terms of getting the right outcomes we're actually achieving. So look, we've got about 6 minutes left, and I've got 3 or 4 more slides, so I'm running out of time. I'm always amazed that when we actually create these presentations, is that I do 13 or 14 slides thinking, oh my gosh, there's enough content. we always run out of time, which I think is actually great. But look, we talk about, there's a lot of providers out there, right? Both large, mid-size, small. Ryan, I know that you've worked with a number of these providers out there from a Microsoft perspective, from a Click perspective. I mean, MicroStrategy, some of the bigger boys that are out there. Tableau obviously just gets bought by Salesforce, which I think is quite interesting, right? So Salesforce now sees the importance of having a BI provider like a Tableau as part of their suite or solution offering to do what? Gain competitive insights, also gaining customer insights. So again, a lot of providers out there. I just want to make sure the audience knows that these are some of the folks out there and kind of how we broke them apart between small, mid-size, and large. Are there any ones out there, without this being an advertisement, is there anybody out there that you think is doing it well, Ryan?
I mean, obviously you're going to look at your Microsofts, your Tableaus, and I mean even Click out there. I mean, everybody that's kind of in that upper, within that large, everybody's doing it, for the most part, very, very well, right? So everybody's trying to figure out, hey, where do we go and, try to piece things together. But, if I talk about Microsoft again, that's one of the areas that obviously I spend a lot of my time in is, it's not only just on the visualization side, which is, traditionally their Power BI, or you've got your SQL Server reporting services, but, it's all the underpinning of services across Azure that is really driving more of this insight. And, whether it's the Azure Data Lake to store my data, am I using, Data Factory or Data Bricks to, move data, analyze the data, and all the machine learnings and other AI pieces of it. And obviously you're looking at Salesforce from a traditional, they've got their Einstein for their AI, and obviously they've really upped their game now with the acquisition of Tableau out there. And again, some of these may not be the right solution for certain customers, and then again, there's a lot of niche players out there that have a very specific capability that it may be industry focused, that hey, they've got these accelerators. I look at Target, for instance. Again, that's one that we use as well for a lot of our customers, is they've got a niche, right? And that's where, again, depending on who you are as an organization, and you may not need just one BI solution, right? And that's the other thing that we can reiterate is they can coexist. A Tableau and a Power BI versus a Click, they can all coexist, because again, a lot of these are just the visualization side of it. Again, I go back to, it's the data. Where are you storing your data? How are we accessing the data? And that's where your data warehouse and your data lakes and everything else out there. And they're even talking about data oceans now that are out there of, I just need to be able to get to the data, right?
Yeah, and really this is the last slide, because you've talked, Ryan, about IoT, right? And is it a hype or is it a reality? And there's a lot of press out there. I mean, National Retail Federation, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Forbes, Internet Retailer, Wired, right? Talking about IoT. You actually brought up IoT, I think, without me even prompting you on the second slide of our presentation day. So is this hype or is this reality? And how are retailers today using Internet of Things and taking that data from multiple, what I call demand signals or input signals, and then really turning it into data? So is it hype or is it reality? And we'll conclude with this, because I think this is a really important topic for the audience to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think it's hype at this point, right? I think it's still in the certain aspects, it's still kind of in the early stages. Others, it's kind of been around, right? Our entire world that we live in is, the Internet of Things, between your phones and, anything else, apps that you may have on there. But, as you look specifically within the retail space is, everybody's, I've got an app, but, these organizations and retail stores, using proximity, based marketing as well, right? How can I, as a consumer, hey, am I accepting to leverage their app through geofencing and proximities and various beacons that these organizations are using? How do I have a higher conversion rate? Or the other piece is, if I've got conversions, rate, and I'm looking at people that are actually transacting, I think, one of the more interesting things in my mind is, what about the people that aren't transacting, right? Or that I'm not converting? You know, where are they at in the store? We talk about, you know, the hot spots, but, you know, what about within the organization? How do I set up, you know, a retail store for the flow to make sure that people, you know, I'm having the best opportunity, you know, to convert that particular resource or that resource, but the consumer as well. So there's all different types of, you know, opportunities to, even from a training perspective, you know, how is a sales associate interacting with a potential consumer, right? You know, is it because can I use that now from a training perspective? Because maybe Johnny is, you know, haven't seen a higher conversion rate versus Susie. Well, why, right? You know, is it because they're interacting more? Are they waiting to interact with them? Or are they interacting and, you know, and again, I go back to the car salesman or the furniture stores. As soon as I walk in that door, somebody's on me, right? You know, to talk to me. Well, what is that creating a higher conversion rate or lower? And I don't know if the data is out there now. People are definitely, there's organizations and technology that are enabling that. So it's in its infancy in certain aspects, but you know, it's really exciting to see.
Yep. Look, I'm going to conclude with this because I think it's important, right? I mean, I look at success is based on your ability to measure, predict, and act on the phone, right? The speed of the customer and getting insights from the customer. Second, the speed of your business, both internal and external, like it'd be either historical or future analytics in terms of data, but also speed of operations. And I know that, Deanna, the speed of operations today is what it's all about. I mean, the reality is that it is about, to me, in my humble opinion, it is about time compression. But it not only is about time compression, it's also about how well I actually manage the experience, what I call post-purchase expectation management. So to me, you know, retail success is speed of customer getting insights around a 360-degree view, around their insights, the speed of your business, the speed of your operations. And the speed is both not only internally, but the speed is internal about how I actually can change the course of the way I do business to manage, right, the ability to effectively create brand loyalty or brand awareness around that customer. And I mean, I'll leave it with that. I'll leave it with that in terms of the actual seminar. We're really out of time. We've hit 2 minutes over. I apologize, but I want to thank Deanna. Thank you so much for your insights. I get chill bumps thinking about what FedEx is doing and the things that you guys are doing in the ecosystem around supply chain and how you're shaping the actual supply chain to support retailers. Ryan, thank you for your insights as a technologist. And with that said, we're going to go ahead and conclude this panel and presentation. And Kaylin, I don't know if you want to finish it up in terms of audience and QA and next steps, but I just want to say thanks to you both and thanks for the audience participation.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So again, thank you from me as well to Jim, Ryan, and Deanna. It was great having you guys today. If we flip to the next slide here, we've got some contact info since we ran out of time for anyone who's on the call. If you have some questions you'd like to follow up, feel free to reach out to Jim, Deanna, or Ryan. And then lastly, all I have for you guys is just remember that our next webinar